animal, right? In some cases, it was like 7 of the animals.
All the clean ones.
I think Leila's taking a pass on this one, Tom.
Why?
See, this whole thing started with her not talking about it. Then she defiantly said, "No, I will," and now she's not talking about it.
Yeah, Leila believes in evolution, though.
Leila, why would you lie?
Leila, are you a Lutheran?
That's what I told her she should be.
Leila, I think the best thing you can do is just admit that you're uncomfortable with it.
Uncomfortable talking about it? Yeah, I mean, I've said that I'm uncomfortable talking. I said that I'm
50-50.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, ask
What
Leila
you're
about
feeling
it.
right now is called cognitive dissonance.
You know what you should do, Tom? You should get John to lecture her about it.
Oh, that's just a nightmare.
Actually, I think John could actually wreck you on this.
Supposedly,
That's probably a good idea.
red-pilled her on the idea that it's just a coincidence she's a Christian. If you believe him.
Well, I don't believe him.
Yeah.
But that's beside the point. Leila's views are like no justifications, no grounding.
Oh fuck!
Nothing. You're just like a kite.
I don't think she like comes in swinging, going, "Hey, I have these views," and then totally backs down. She doesn't.
No, I agree with that. She's
But
not aggressive
that's so fucking annoying, right? Like I got a father-in-law who's a Lutheran, believes in a young earth. And then I have some time between school and going back to work, and he's like, well, maybe we could take the grandkids and go fossil hunting. And the first thing that came to my mind was, I didn't even know that fossil was in your fucking vocabulary. Right? This guy's a literalist, a biblical literalist, and I'm supposed to sit there and keep my fucking mouth shut while we hunt for millions of fossils that are millions or billions of years old.
You need to take
That's
it out
what's
on
frustrating
Leila.
about associating with Christians who believe in a young Earth.
Well, I don't think Leila, you don't believe in a young Earth, do you?
No, I'm an old Earth.
That's well. Don't be an old Earth creationist either. They're dumb.
I think at heart, Leila is just a cultural Christian, honestly.
Wait, what?
Oh fuck!
I think
I'm
at
not a
heart,
cultural Christian. What even is a cultural Christian?
basically, you don't believe in anything
Pay
that John
lip service.
you don't believe in anything that John would describe as the woo-woo. Like, you don't believe in the literal resurrection of Jesus. You don't believe that Noah's Ark was actually a thing. You're not a young or old Earth creationist. You just think that there are some values that could be described as Judeo-Christian that are beneficial.
Well, I'm not a cultural Christian then.
Because you believe what of those things?
Well, I'm an old Earth creationist. I believe that Jesus resurrected, and I also believe.
Wait, can we just start with that? Like, why do you believe Jesus resurrected?
Because the Bible says so.
I believe the Bible.
Leila's not going to be able to defend that shit.
Yes, but the only real argument I know is the minimal facts one, and then besides that, I just go off of my own experience with
minimal facts would apply to the resurrection. I agree, but I'm asking why I believe that the Bible is true, holy, and holy in the W sense.
Leila, just abort.
Yeah,
I mean,
if you don't want to talk about it, we can drop it. That's fine.
Abort, Leila.
I mean, it's okay if I look dumb. I'm just trying to think of why I just go off and I think the experience of the Holy Spirit is not special. What's the word? Like, unmistakable and yeah. And
Yeah, what?
so that
that was like the most non-answer to the question that I had. Come on.
I don't have a formal answer for you.
You don't even
I
have
told
a
you that at the beginning.
Yeah, but I'm asking you why you believe that the Bible is the case. Like, that the Bible has any semblance of truth. And holy with the W symbol.
Wait, and Leila's a mod of the supposed philosophy server? What kind of crazy world is this?
Look, I'm not trying to beat her up. I'm just curious. I mean, she was my test subject for my argument against street epistemologists, right? So I have respect for her. I'm not trying to kick her to the curb here. And if you don't want to talk about it, Leila, that's fine.
No, I'm just teasing Leila. I don't mean to be mean or anything.
Look,
That's just
Leila's not.
Michael saying that he's gonna tear you
Leila
apart.
isn't claiming. She's not claiming that Christianity is true. She's not even claiming it's a rational belief, but it's not irrational or irrational. It's irrational. She just believes it. She doesn't try to give justification for it.
Hey, Leila, do you know
This is concerned trolling.
Hang on, Wolf. Do you know what it means to be irrational in your belief, Leila?
Yeah.
What does irrational mean?
It means neither rational or rational.
Wait, let her please, Godless, let her answer.
I mean, neither irrational. Talk to me about Leila's position.
Oh, yeah. What were you gonna say?
Why are you guys picking on Leila?
Well, because she owes me this conversation, just like Danny owes me this conversation, but he came back all fresh-faced now, apparently.
What?
Oh,
that's right, motherfucker. You owe me a conversation, brother.
That's right, we do.
I just started listening. I didn't know they owed you a conversation. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I'm just fucking with you, Danny. Leila, if you don't want to have the conversation, we don't have to have it. It's cool.
Maybe Danny can tell me why doesn't Danny go, and then maybe I'll figure out some belief.
Danny said he's not feeling it today.
Well, yeah, I'm not feeling it today.
Yeah, but
Danny, why don't you just go, please?
Can I say something about Danny's position though? Danny's changed his Christianity to the point where it's so watered down since coming to, because he will change his mind when you give him arguments a lot of the times, and he does know the problems with Christianity. So he has just such this watered down version of Christianity that it's practically not even Christianity.
So wait, Danny, I said I believe in Christianity based on my experience of the Holy Spirit, and then they asked me, Bible is true, but where would I go from there? What am I supposed to say?
Just be honest. I mean, I think that for me, I've come down to the point that I just have an intuition, and that's the fundamental stem of my belief. I just feel like it's true, and that's not irrational. But it's not I can't make the claim that I'm rationally warranted in my belief. But right now, I don't have an issue with that.
That's what I said. I said the same thing, but then they said it was.
Well, I mean, I don't understand. If you say that your belief is fundamental, what can they say?
Well, how is it fundamental? What do you mean it's fundamental?
Meaning that it's just like, when I mean fundamental, I'm just meaning like there's no rational grounds in which like my faith is not based on any rationality, because if it were, then all you would have to do is demonstrate why it's actually an irrational position, and then my beliefs would change. But but the thing is that
that's the best route. That's the best route you can go. I think, like, if I was a Christian, that would be the best route. I think that's defensible that I would go. But the thing is that your belief in Christianity isn't going to cohere with your other beliefs. That's what makes it irrational.
That's right.
Maybe, but I think that what I'm trying to say is that if you were to demonstrate all this evidence why Christianity wasn't the case, that wouldn't move my beliefs.
No, but that's just the problem, right? Is that there's no such thing that can disconfirm Christianity. right? And if you have some sort of phenomenon out in the real world that can be explained by two different hypotheses, then you ought not be privileging one over the other.
What do you mean disconfirm?
I mean that you could be able to provide some sort of falsifiability for the hypothesis, right? I drop the pin, it goes down. This is some sort of evidence.
But to me,
that
it's
you
not
would
a
expect, given
hypothesis.
the okay, then what is it to you?
It's just a belief.
So it's non-propositional? Wait a minute, it's non-propositional?
I don't see how a proposition is necessarily a hypothesis, right? I thought a hypothesis, when you say hypothesis in this sense, you mean explanation, right?
I mean to say that it's a proposition that has some explanatory power.
I'm not trying to put forth that case.
Well, then what is it then? It's just a propositional attitude?
Well, I might say that, I might claim that it might explain some things that I observe, but what I mean put forth the case, I mean, I'm not trying to argue for that.
But when you say it explains some things that you observe, right? I can think of other reasons that would explain the same phenomenon.
Yeah, that's fine, but I'm not going to accept those.
Which means, right? Of course, you're not going to accept it. But there's no reason that you can offer me that would
That's
be
fine. I'm not trying to
privileging. Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
Let me get my point out. Right, so I think it irrational, not irrational, but irrational to privilege one hypothesis over another. Right? Given the fact that two hypotheses or more could explain the sort of phenomenon that we observe in the external world.
Well, so you think it's irrational to think that God is responsible for why there's something rather than nothing?
Yes.
Well, it's going to depend on what your reasons are, right?
An ad hoc explanation is not irrational.
No, so the thing that I'm saying is that if there are two hypotheses that can explain the same phenomenon, right? In virtue of what are you privileging one over the other?
Intuition.
Yeah, but I mean, schizophrenics have intuitions that paintings have headaches.
How are you not begging to question against other people's intuitions? They can appeal to the same thing.
I wouldn't claim that they're wrong. I'm not claiming that you're wrong.
It's not about being
I'm
wrong.
not saying you're wrong.
Sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
He's asking you, how would you adjudicate between these two hypotheses? Which is the best explanation of the facts on the table? If you say intuition, that's something that's available to the other guy. So you're either just begging to question against their intuition, or you're going to have to find something else in order to show that your hypothesis is the one that better explains.
I agree with you in that if I was trying to justify my claim, then this is the problem that I would be presented to me. But I'm not trying to justify. I'm explaining to you as to why I have these beliefs.
What's the difference between justification and you having some sort of reasons for your belief?
I think there's a difference between what may justify a belief and what may cause a belief, right? I could bump into a tree and that could cause a belief that.
I understand that.
Right.
But
so
I'm asking you the reasons that you believe, right? And you're sort of comparing it to this idea of justification, right? And we haven't even gotten to justification yet.
If I have an intuition that causes a belief, that's not by itself irrational, correct?
Say that again.
If I have a particular intuition that causes a belief, that belief is not necessarily irrational, right?
Not necessarily, no.
Right, and it's not necessarily rational. It's irrational, right?
Right, and I'm not disagreeing with you here. But what I'm saying is that you're irrational in privileging one hypothesis over another. And if you understand a worldview of another, right, say some sort of naturalistic account, we don't need to privilege anyone here for the sake of argument. But let's say that there's a naturalistic account that you're aware of, right? Why privilege yours with a teleology over a naturalistic account? Based on intuition?
Well, I would ask you, what's the naturalistic account as to why there's something rather than nothing?
That would be a left turn. That would be a whole left turn from why you're privileging one hypothesis over another.
What's the alternative accounts? Now, I could grant that the God hypothesis here is ad hoc, okay? But what are the other possible explanations as to why there's something rather than nothing?
To me, that seems like a left turn as to why you're privileging, right? There's
I don't
some
know what that means by left turn. I don't know what you mean by left turn.
It's irrelevant, right? So we're talking about two different things, right? There might be.
Hold on, real quick. By left turn, do you mean like a shifting of the burden of proof?
No, Wolf.
Michael, let me just maybe it'll help if I explain where I'm coming from. I'm saying this. Look, I look around the world. I see things. I ask myself, why are these things here rather than not? Right? So then I have an intuition, right? Maybe something, some being is responsible for it, right? And so then I come to the belief that God exists. Now, that's not, I might agree that that's not justification for the belief, but the intuition caused the belief nonetheless. And it's
and I'm a doxastic involuntarist, so I would have no problem with you being compelled by irrational reasons for holding a positive propositional attitude with regards to God's existence. You've heard of Jack's shoe-stealing fairy analogy, right?
Right.
Right. So I'm asking you, in virtue of what are you privileging this one hypothesis or this one idea or worldview over another?
Are you asking why I feel like that's the case?
No, because that would be different. I'm asking you why you're privileging if you're aware that there are other explanations for why things are the way they are.
I'm not aware of any other explanation.
So you're unfamiliar with naturalistic accounts of how we got here?
No. I'm not familiar. I'm familiar with those. I'm asking why there's anything at all, right? That just doesn't just involve human beings or, species, right? Living things.
But that opens up a whole new can of worms because you also believe in creation ex nihilo, right? Presumably you think that God spoke and so it became.
Right.
Right. So that's creation out of nothing. You and I differ in no sense on that regard, other than the fact of the origin of what that something is.
Let's see if I can be more specific. Why are there physical things rather than there being a state where there are no physical things?
I have no idea, and this all seems like a left turn as to why you believe it's the case.
Well, you said you have no idea. You were proposing that there are alternative hypotheses other than God as an explanation, right?
Right. So I can understand why somebody would be compelled to believe, which is a positive propositional attitude, about a certain state of affairs given a supernatural explanation, right? I can imagine how that would be compelling to somebody. But I'm asking why you are privileging. I'm not asking about the state of affairs. I'm asking about your position on it.
Are there other possible explanations for why there's physical material as opposed to be in the state of non-physical material, non-physical objects?
I didn't get that the first.
I'm sorry, I butchered it up. What I meant to say, I'm eating a hush puppy, but what I meant to say is, what are the possible explanations for why there's physical material as opposed as there not being any physical material?
Well, one can imagine or conceive of a lot of different reasons.
Okay.
But what I'm asking about is why you're privileging.
I said because I can't conceive of any other explanation.
So we're now here stuck with your inability to. Your lack of imagination.
Well, I'm asking you.
No. I don't mean to, because that's going to come across as mean and insulting, right? But
isn't that?
You'll have to forgive me if it is, but I don't mean it to be that way, right? So your conception or your worldview is built on your inability to conceive of any other way in which it was, in which this world came about.
Michael. That could be the case, and I've asked you, what's another possible explanation? You said, well, there are a lot of them, right? There are a lot of reasons, and you haven't provided one. Maybe you can give me a competing hypothesis for why there's physical material at all, as opposed to there not being any.
Well, I can think of this idea of, some physical explanation or some explanation in physics that where nothing is really not nothing, but something comes out of it, some sort of Lawrence Krauss explanation, that the laws of physics break down, and so we can't offer a full account, but there's something there that is sufficient. Maybe not necessary, but sufficient.
Wait, let me get this straight. My question is that right now we're in a world where there's physical material. My question is, why are we in a world where there's physical material as opposed to there's not being any physical material? And you're offered a possible explanation where there's a state where there's no physical material, what there actually is physical material that can explain why there's physical material. And to me, that's not what I'm...
Well, see, we brought up this idea of something from nothing, right? But this all is going to come down to a terminological dispute about what you mean.
I'm being very clear on my terms. That's why I'm avoiding saying something, anything, nothing.
You said very something specific, rather from nothing.
Right. So I narrowed in on specifically what I meant by that. So I've used the terms non-physical and physical. So we're currently in a world where there's physical material, right? And I'm asking, why are we not in a world where there's no physical material?
This seems to be a turn, right?
I don't know what you mean by turn.
So I'm trying to understand why you are privileging one explanation over another, and you're saying
I can't conceive of another hypothesis.
I wasn't done there.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So you're saying because you can't conceive of it, right? And then what you're wanting to do is say, look, you can conceive of something else, right? And I'm saying, yes, I can, right? And my offering you an account that, yes, I can conceive of another explanation seems to be unsatisfactory to you.
You haven't provided this other explanation.
Danny,
well,
why
I don't think anybody.
Can I just ask really quick? Why do you think you even need an explanation?
Well, it's curious.
Either why don't you say you don't know, or maybe the universe exists necessarily?
Well, I don't know.
This is all a left turn from why you're privileging something over another, and you're saying that you can't conceive of it, right? I think at that point the conversation is over, right? If you can't conceive of it, that's fine, right? And you're saying, look, but you can conceive of some other states of affairs in which these states of affairs that we currently know obtain. Right? And I don't think that anything that I can supply to you is going to be convincing if, by your own admission, you cannot conceive of them.
I want to go. You have not provided an alternative hypothesis.
A fairy did it.
Okay, a fairy is a fairy physical?
No, it's immaterial.
It's immaterial. Is it as powerful? Is it powerful enough to be able to bring about physical material and this much of it?
This is an ontological thing, right?
It is.
Yes.
Okay. Is it atemporal? Wait, I'm talking to Godless for a second. Is it atemporal, Godless?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you're calling a fairy is what I'm calling God.
How about it not being atemporal?
Wait, in my hypothesis, all the fairy has the power to do is bring about the universe and nothing else.
Well, then I'm glad you believe in fairies. I mean, you're no longer
But now the question is, what reason is there to favor your hypothesis over mine?
We have the same hypothesis, which at this point, it's just a semantic dispute.
No, it's not a same hypothesis, right? Because I said again, this is an ontological thing. Right, this is an ontological argument. You're just defining the necessary and sufficient cause to be necessary and sufficient.
I'm not. I never talked about necessity, did I?
No, but it's going to come down to that. It's going to come down to that.
I haven't. It hasn't come down to that. You're saying that.
But I can show you how it does, though.
I wouldn't say.
Hang on, Danny, are you saying that your God has no further powers than to create a universe and maybe not even exist anymore past that?
I'm saying that in terms, for those people that are late to the conversation, what I'm trying to do is explain, is to provide why I believe that there is a God. I'm not trying to justify the proposition, right?
Sure. No, I'm asking. Okay, so I'm asking this because you said that it's the same thing as Godless's proposed fairy. right?
I
But
just want
God
to interject. This is why I wanted to have the conversation with you privately, Dan.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, but this, I'm willing to have this conversation privately at a later time. I'm not trying to dodge you, Michael.
No, I get it.
I'm sorry if I'm interjecting here.
Well, this is awkward.
Yeah, it's awkward because I'm specifically getting at something here, right? And Godless brought it up. Well, I'm not asking what those states of affairs that are necessitating your belief. Excuse me. I'm not asking about those states of affairs. I'm asking why you're privileging one hypothesis over another, despite your inability to access those states of affairs.
Okay, and I guess I wasn't clear. I see one explanation. We both understand that God as an explanation is a possibility, right?
Right, but there's all kinds of possibility, right? So I don't accept logical possibility as something being necessary, right? So I might defer to something more like empirical possibility.
Well,
in this case,
I don't think those are sufficient, because what empirical explanations only refer to explanations that occur, phenomena that occur in the physical realm, right?
I don't want to throw the conversation off, but I just want to point out that Danny says he can't conceive of anything else being the cause of the universe, but I mean, there's plenty of things you could conceive of, and actually he said before he can't even conceive of what God is. So there's things he can conceive of that he doesn't believe, and he can't conceive of what he does believe.
I can't I don't, rather I should say, maybe conceivability, I should throw that out the window. What I mean to say is I don't know any other explanation for why there's physical material supposed there not being physical material.
Right, but that means to say that, so let's take a reductive count of knowledge here, right? I mean, when I say reductive account, reliable, true, or justifiably true belief, right? But I'm asking you, in virtue of what are you, do you know this thing to be the case?
I don't know it.
So you're saying that it's just a belief that you hold?
Yes, that's what I've been saying the whole time.
Okay, that's fine. And this is what, again, we're rewinding the clock 30 minutes. So I wouldn't hold you to the same epistemic standards. I'm asking you why, and you're saying because you can't conceive of it. But then Godless offered you an account, a very easy one, where there is another sufficient cause, like say Jack's shoe stealing fairy, right? That could account for why shoes are missing from the garage, right? Or some fairy that creates worlds, you know, and you're saying that you can't conceive of it. That seems trivially true to say that there is some other thing, and then you're saying that we're just talking about something that comes down to a terminological dispute about what that thing is.
Yeah,
and we're talking
tell
about
me
the
where
same
I went
thing.
wrong there when I said, because if I define just very basically for like a mechanism in which is atemporal, outside of physical reality, is immaterial and powerful, then I would describe that as X, right? And I think that X it's plausible to think that X could be God, right? And if she wants to call that entity a fairy, then we're talking about the same thing.
False. No, you're not, because there's some sufficient cause. It's not necessary. You'd have to demonstrate the necessity of it.
Now you're just losing me. I don't know what you mean.
I'm sorry. So let me slow it down. So in order for you and Godless, your God and Godless's fairy to be the same thing, and this to be a terminological dispute, means that these two different hypotheses have a shared property. There's some sort of transitive property between the two, and that transitive property is necessity, right?
My hypothesis is not even a deity. I don't think, like a fairy that all it's ever done is create the universe. It's not a deity.
But that's what I'm saying, right? The idea is that there is something that necessarily follows from it, that it's the God that you're talking about, Danny.
I'm not making any necessary claim, right? I'm just saying that whatever this is, it could be a mechanism, it could be Godless's fairy, right? Shares some attributes with the God that I've conceived of through the biblical text, let's say, right? It's not exactly analytically the same, right? But they share these properties that bring about the belief that they're the same thing.
That bring about the belief, right? That's a normative issue, right? We're not talking
it's not a justification.
Right, but what I'm talking about is why you can't conceive of it when offered another hypothesis, right? That is sufficient for it. And you'll forgive me here, but you've been offered another hypothesis, which
the fairy hypothesis.
Hang on just a second. You've been offered a hypothesis which explains sufficiently the phenomenon that you experience in the natural world.
I deny that. I don't think I've been offered such a thing.
Why wouldn't the fairy account for it?
I agree with the fairy account. We're talking about the same account.
Again, I don't know how you can call it the same if they share the same properties, right? There could be other properties, higher properties that these two different entities have.
And also, I think fairies.
Wait. Let me finish.
Okay.
So these two entities have the same properties, right? But there's a greater sense in which one exists in the other, right? That one sense could be that it compels you to believe in one over the other. But there is a fact of the matter. And so when we ask you why you privilege one over the other, it seems to come down to your bias. I just want to believe that this is the case.
I'm just saying that the fairy thing, I don't consider the fairy thing. Well, there's two ways I could have approached it. The first way in which I just approached it, and the second way where I can't, from what I understand to be a fairy, is I understand it to be something material, right? I mean, there's usually an association with a humanoid figure or even a male or female.
Okay. Then let's just start there, right? Wait, hang on just a second. So the material effect of the entity matters, and I would agree with that. So Danny, can you offer me a material effect that your deity that you believe in has on the external world, such that we could go out and explore it and test that it's the case?
No, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested
Why?
in look, there's a difference between what can we explain in terms of how physical phenomena works, right? Like if we see the sun rise, how do we explain why it's rising versus why anything exists at all and why anything physical exists? I think those are two different questions, right?
I don't, right? So you're saying that your conception of God has some sort of material effect. Is that true? Yes or no?
It seems like he
then
yes.
What is that material effect?
That I think that this deity has the power to bring about physical objects from immaterialness.
I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about what material effect it has, such that it could be observed this side of the grave, unquote.
Oh, I wouldn't know. I guess I wouldn't be prepared to answer that question, but that's not what I'm talking about. I think it's a different question.
Right, but if you can't answer that question, then your hypothesis is virtually indistinguishable from a null hypothesis.
Well, my belief, I don't consider anything that I observe to be, where I would never claim that there's a rational root to a supernatural explanation for why a particular phenomena behaves the way it does, right? That's not my claim. I have nothing to do with that. I understand what's wrong with the God hypothesis in terms of its falsification. It's unfalsifiable, right? But I think there's a different question of separate from that issue, and that's why there's any physical material at all. And I think there's only two positions I feel like it could take. Either I don't know, or there was a mechanism, right, that's immaterial, outside of time, and powerful.
But how could you know of a mechanism outside of that's transcendental? How could you know of it?
Well, I think that it's just deductive, right? It's just based on the meanings of the words, where if...
Wait a minute. You're saying that there is a deductive argument such that the conclusion is guaranteed that results in a transcendental being that is both necessary and sufficient for all that we observe?
Maybe I'm not using the correct terminology. I'll try to unpack what I meant. if there are no physical objects, right? And then if there's anything that exists, it has to be non-physical. Would you agree?
You're going to have to repeat that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if there are no physical objects in a world, then things that exist in that world have to be non-physical, right?
Okay.
Okay. So that means there are objects, I think it's plausible to think that there are objects that are non-physical, right? And the only things that I can conceive of as far as not immaterial objects are abstract objects like propositions, right? And minds.
How are minds non-physical, right? Like, look, I would agree with you. I'm not a naturalist, right? So I don't think, but the minds issue is something different altogether. We don't have a case of minds that don't exist outside of brains. Right? So how do you get to that?
I can conceive, for instance, like this idea of
but logical possibility is not the same thing as empirical possibility.
No, that's what I'm trying. I'm saying that there's only, I can only think of, I see what you're saying. I think I can only think of two possibilities of objects that can exist outside of physical material, right? And maybe you can add to that list. I don't know if there's any others, right? And so, did I kind of address what you said? Or maybe I didn't understand what you said. Is it because you said empirical and possibility?
Look, just because we have an argument, right? So I take, and this is, of course, I'm borrowing from Jack here, but so I take it to be the case that justifiers are arguments and evidence, right? And it's in virtue of they're increasing the probability of a proposition being true that they count as evidence, right? And so when you talk about some sort of justification, right, like intuitionism, some sort of non-propositional evidence or non-inferential justification that justifies a proposition or gives you reason to believe that the proposition is true, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I think I don't know why you're cornering me into this justification corner. Like I'm not.
I'm asking you. Look, so here's why, right? So when I hold a belief, right, I as a skeptic try to raise it to the epistemic responsibility that we have, such that it can be knowledge, right? Knowledge is a subset of belief, and so when I say that I know something is the case, I believe it to be the case, and I also have some reasons for it to be the case, right? So and when you say that you hold a belief, presumably there's reasons why you hold a belief, and I would say that you're not holding yourself to that same sort of epistemic justification makes you irrational or irrational. And if you're saying that because it feels like something or it seems to be the case to you, and you can be irrational in holding it, but there are all sorts of other hypotheses. There are all sorts of other explanations.
You have not presented one.
What do you mean?
What are the possible explanations that you know of, right, that other than that there's a... Wait, let me finish. I'll let you finish.
Wait, Danny, that's poisoning the well to say that I know of. That means that it's true, because I take knowledge to be justified true belief. So when you say what are other explanations that you know of, there's a truth proposition in there, a truth property that would mean that there are more than one accounts that are true. And I don't think that's the case, so you're poisoning the well.
That's not my knowledge claim. That's yours.
Michael, you changed what you meant by knowledge a second ago.
I'm sorry?
A second ago, when you said knowledge, you were just talking about having a reason to believe it, but now you're switching it to it also has to be true, a true belief.
Right. So when I'm asked if there are explanations that I know of, and my reductive account of knowledge is that it's justified true belief, it's that truth property of knowledge that would make multiple accounts to be inconsistent.
But Danny, I don't think you're saying that you're justified in believing
Not right now, and I that is my endeavor, right? I'll be transparent that way. I just haven't arrived at that. I don't think I've arrived at that, and but I think that there is, as to why I have the intuition that God exists. I'm telling you, comes down from the question: why is there physical material as opposed to no physical material? And I think intuitively, I see that there's a possible explanation that there was a mechanism that was atemporal, immaterial, and powerful that might have brought about physical material. Right now,
see, it's those sort of claims that make me sympathetic to non-cognitivism, because I don't know what atemporal causation means. I don't even know what that means, atemporal causation.
Well, but that's so. Are you saying that it's incoherent? Because just because when you say you don't know how it works, doesn't mean that, or what it means, doesn't
no,
render it incoherent.
No. I'm just saying that my idea of causation rests in time, right? My idea of it.
Well, there's logical causation in a sense, right? Where you take premises, right? There's things that are logically prior, so there's a type of before in which doesn't involve temporality. So that's one, right? And then I think that there might be a notion of something that's causally prior, right?
But then you're using knowledge that relies on time, right? So to say prior, right, logically
Danny, are you
prior,
saying
and
God
then
is
say
logically
before.
prior to the?
No, I'm saying he's causally prior.
I don't understand.
Does that mean that there was a time? There was a time before the universe came into existence?
I don't think so.
Well, then in what sense is it prior or before? I don't understand the use of language in this case.
Well,
that's what makes me sympathetic to non-cognitivists in this sense.
I think that the best way I could explain it, there was one analogy that I liked, and I forgot it. There's the second analogy, which I don't like as much, but I'll use it nonetheless. If you think of cogs, right? Think of 4 or 5 different cogs that are joined together, right? And if I move the first cog, right, then at the same time, right, there will be the fourth cog will move, right, as a result of moving the first, right? So each cog is causally prior to the other, yet they all move at the same time. That's my best analogy. I think there was a better one, and I forgot it. But I think there is it's problematic to say that God created.
But you're saying God is responsible for time.
Yes. Well, he's if we just say, sorry, I thought you said, excuse me. I think that God is responsible for physical material, and the changes in physical material. I just call that, I just relate that to time.
I don't understand. Are you saying God caused the universe at the same time as it began to exist?
I think that he was just causally prior to, in the same way that the second cog was causally prior to the fourth cog moving.
Yeah, but that's you're drawing an analogy by using cogs, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm asking, in what sense would it be analogous to use cogs, right?
Well,
this is the same reason why we get on Darth about using some sort of like analogical idea of knowledge, some like ectypal versus archetypal idea of God's knowledge, right? But I'm asking you, what's the transitive property between this sort of causation that it's timeless, that these things exist in the same sense?
Well, I don't know. That's part of the reason why I don't claim to know. I'm just saying this is why I believe it.
I want to know why it makes sense to you. That's why I'm asking you this. Honestly, I'm not looking for a debate. I just want to know why it makes sense to you. Like why you're willing to sign off on all these like lifeboat scenarios to save God, right?
Well,
to save some sort of belief in God, right? And we've already had this idea that logical possibility is not the same as empirical possibility, and I don't think that that's a controversial thing to say, right?
I don't know why that was relevant, by the way.
Well, because just because you offer a possibility doesn't mean it's the case.
No, but if you only know of one possibility, right? That's not to say that I know that that was the explanation. Those are two different statements, right? To say I only know of one explanation that fits the sort of necessary conditions prior to there being physical material, and that is a mechanism, right? That sounds much like the notion of God, a deistic kind of
Right,
thing.
but we've already talked. But we've already talked about this, right?
Danny,
So it's
but
oh god.
The crude type of induction you're using can be used to justify the inference that minds depend on bodies to exist, and bodies depend on the universe to exist, and that's the same type of inference that you're making when you're making a loose inference about, well, the only things that we know exist that are non-physical are minds. So if it's a non-physical thing, it must be a mind since it can't be an abstract object. That type of loose inference justifies the proposition that there couldn't be a non-physical mind, right? Because all minds that we don't know of any minds that don't depend on that. So it's the same type of crude induction. Just like we don't know of any mechanisms that exist atemporally or aspatially that could create the universe, right? We don't know of any minds that exist in sort of non-physical form. So you can use that same type of justification that you're giving to justify an atheological argument that it can't be God.
Some of that went over my head, but I remember that when we had a discussion the other night, that we could conceive of ourselves being in the wrong body, right? That we can conceive of who we are in being in a different body, right? So I think that then like you're saying. So you do affirm that there's a distinction between the mind and all the physical facts of the body, right? And you're saying, and so if you could slow down for me and specifically address why those two things depend on each other for existence, or why one depends on each other.
We've never seen a mind without a body, so we don't have any reason to believe that could be the case, right?
Well, okay.
But the reason I'm saying that, though, is because that's the type of inference you're using when you're saying, well, if it's a non-physical thing, the only type of thing that we've seen that's non-physical is a mind. That's not an abstract object. That's the same type of inference that you're using. So I'm saying by your lights, by that argument's sake, you can run an atheological argument.
Well, I hope I don't know at what point you arrived in this conversation, but I wanted to make sure you understood that I was not making the claim that I had a good inference here. Okay, I was explaining.
No, I'm saying when you explain what you're saying, I'm saying you are making an inference.
Right, but it's not a good inference, is what you're saying. It's not justification.
Look, I'm not saying that it's not justification. I'm saying there's an undercutting defeater for that type of inference that makes it an atheological argument.
This is going over my head, to be honest. So when I say that there are two immaterial objects, abstract objects, and minds, you're saying I'm not licensed to say that because we can't. Okay, what? I'm not licensed. Okay.
I'm not saying that. No.
What am I not licensed? What inference am I not licensed to make? That it's plausibility?
Look, I'm not saying that you're not licensed to make any inference. I'm saying that if you think you're licensed to making that inference, then you also have a defeater for the kalam, because you can use that same type of reasoning to justify that. Well, we've never seen any minds that don't have bodies with them, right? So we could the only thing that we can't. The only thing that we could think of, insofar as minds are concerned, have bodies attached to them. So you would need a spatially extended body, in order to have a mind at all. And so if you're using that type of induction, then you can see that you can't justify that there could be a God, because he would have to exist without space and time. And if those are prerequisites for a body, which again, that using that same type of induction that you were just using, then we can't say that there's any type or we can't say that there's any bodies that exist that are non-physical.
Okay, so I see. Are you saying that was all? I hope you're patient with me because it's hard for me to understand. But I think what you're saying is that we can't conceive of minds independent, or we don't have any reason to think that their minds depend on physical bodies, right? And if that's the case, if we have reason to believe that that's the case, then they can't exist if there's no physical material. So we would say that then the only thing that exists outside of physical material would be something like just abstract objects. Is that what you're saying?
But whatever created the inference is that, well, whatever created the universe, it couldn't have been a mind.
Because minds are dependent on bodies. That's the only way we come to know that they exist.
Right. Well, I don't know about come to know that they exist, but that's the only type of minds that we're acquainted with. So just like we're not the only type of things that cause anything that we're acquainted with are minds and physical objects, the only types of things that we're acquainted with that have minds are bodies. So there's this crude inductive inference, right? Well, I don't know what a non-physical, like a mechanistic cause that was non-physical would be. If you said something like that, you don't know what that is, right? You could say, well, I don't know what a body without spatial extension, or like without requiring being linked to spatial extension is, right?
I think, but doesn't that commit you to nominalism? Because in the same way, I can't conceive of a proposition, or I can't know of a proposition existing independently from a thought.
It's not my argument. If you think it commits, I don't think it commits anyone to nominalism, no. But the point is that I'm saying that you're making an inductive inference. That's the type of inference that you're making, right? When you say that it couldn't be a non-physical mechanism, because the only mechanisms we know of are physical and mental. That's what you're saying. So it couldn't be a non-physical. Sorry, the only causes we know of are physical and mental. So if you're using that same type of reasoning to rule out a non-physical mechanism, then you can use that same type of reasoning to rule out that it could be a mind.
You were here for the whole conversation, right, Josh? I just didn't know if I could refer back to it, or do I have to re-explain?
I don't know. I was in and out.
Okay, so I guess I wasn't. Maybe I was like hybridizing the kalam and then the I don't know what the other argument is, but the idea of why there's something rather than nothing. I think that's distinct from the kalam, right? But that's to say, if there's a case in which there are no physical, there's no physical objects in a world, what could possibly exist in that world? And I'm just asking you.
Oh well, I think that I think that the only things that would exist in that world would be like abstract objects.
And you're saying that minds, it's impossible that minds could exist in that world.
I don't think a mind could exist in a world where there was no physicality, you know.
So it's impossible.
It's
incoherent.
Yeah, the reason I think that is because I think that a body sets your perspective on the world. So I think it's impossible for a mind not to have a perspective on the world.
You don't think that there could be a immaterial concrete object that would allow you to perceive?
Well, I don't know what that would be besides a body.
Well, that's to say an immaterial body? Is that a contradiction?
I think that there would be an equivocation about what's material then, because I think that we would be using it in the same sense, in the sense that it constrains our experience.
Could there be a non-physical entity that would allow you to perceive other non-physical things?
A non-physical entity that allows you to perceive other non-physical things?
Yes.
I have to think about what that question means because it's not clear to me.
Well, in the Christian, when we die, our souls, there's this idea of heaven, right? And there's going to be this it's been promised that we'll see God, right? So there is this concept of being able to perceive, even though we're no longer physical. So I think it's on Christianity, it's not incoherent to say that we'll have a type of body or a type of form that allows us to perceive God.
Yeah, I think that there's going to end up being an equivocation on what is physical. I think that what's going to end up being meant on a view like that is that you're still going to have a body, and the physics of that body is just going to be different than the physics of this universe.
Well, what do you take to be a physical material? I mean, I just can think that as if we could just simply, I mean, maybe there's no simple way to define it, right? But what do you take to be physical material? Like, what properties do you have to have in order to be physical?
Like in the most basic sort of sense, it's what makes it the case that your experience is what it is, rather than something different. At the most basic level, it's that type of dependency. So
yeah,
like,
why
do I think? So if you answer questions like why do I think that the wall is blue rather than green when I look at the wall? It's ultimately it's going to depend on some things in my brain, right? Those are going to be physical things. It's going to depend on the light waves, and so ultimately the analysis is what makes it the case that you're experiencing the way you're experiencing things.
I can't keep up with you at this point. I'm just because I just have a very simplistic understanding of physical substance, right?
But I think what Danny's talking about is materiality and extensionality. Simply,
yeah,
right?
But,
that's all he's talking about.
Yeah, but what I was saying is I don't think that there's really a fundamental distinction between those types of things and that which constrains our experience. I think that.
Yeah, I understand. You're talking about anything that constrains experience outside of experience, right?
Right, and I'm saying that the reason that we're taking those things that like material to be physical is in virtue of the fact that they constrain experience.
Yeah, but couldn't Danny say, that, ultimately there's going to be some kind of other object outside of experience, but could it be other experiences? Like, could it be like the equivalent of the dual aspect view?
Well, I don't think that there's anything different between the dual aspect view and what I'm saying.
Yeah, but is it different than what Danny's saying? I guess.
I don't know, but I think that like the idea of a soul would just end up having different physics.
Well, I think that's the bigger objection, right? Which is, what would it mean for there to not be physics, but to be something like meaning, right? So even if you call it immaterial, Danny, in what way is it interesting to call it immaterial if it follows the laws of physics?
That it just, I'm wholly unprepared to give a whole account of what a physical substance is or what the essence of physical substances are. But I mean, a simplistic understanding of it is composed of atoms, quarks, subatomic particles, right? And then these things engage in a particular way where they conform to some sort of natural law. But I think that I could definitely understand that there might be. What?
So the natural law thing is important there, right? And I think it's what I'm saying is that the natural law thing is way more fundamental than the particles, because you can imagine a world which still had all the same physical objects in it,
yeah,
just like you and me, but no subatomic particles, right?
Yeah, I can imagine me being made of. I can imagine myself, but not knowing that I'm made of subatomic particles.
No, not just not knowing that you're made of, but there's no actual subatomic particles in the world.
I feel like. Okay, go ahead.
But you can still make generalizations, and there's still things that are law-like in that world, right? Like there don't need to be atoms aren't a necessary thing, is what I'm saying. I don't think that that's disagreeable.
Well, I think they're necessary in my concept of physical substance, I think that they could behave differently. There could be different laws. Like this is not what I mean to say.
Why would atoms be necessary?
Right. Why would you think that? Why would you think that if, do you think that, like, what if atoms were never discovered? You know what I mean? Like, you would still have all the same notions of physics.
Yeah, what if the fundamental thing is not atomic but wave-like, let's say?
No, I think I would recant what I just said, or retract what I just said. But I'm just saying that seems like if I just don't have a robust definition of what physical substances are. And maybe I can look into that. But it seems like physical substances are going to be made of stuff, right? And if that stuff is not there, then there's no physical stuff. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. But yeah, I'm just wholly unprepared for the conversation. Honestly, this is why I wanted to.
I mean, Danny, just to help you out, like, so I think the traditional kind of pre-philosophical view, right, is that physical things are things that take up space in some container, right? And that's like the pre-philosophical view of the world.
Right.
But once you start kind of like thinking about the nature of the interaction of mind to space, you kind of can realize that no longer really seems intuitively correct or may even make sense logically as a possibility. And then you have to start thinking, well, all there is my experiences, and there's something separate from my experiences constraining my experiences in a law-like fashion, right? Or random. There's no other options, either law-like or random in terms of the constraints, right? And so, you can think of all those things outside of your experiences or mind as the physical things, or the, things outside of your experiences. Doesn't matter how you want to call them, right? They don't have to take up space, right?
List went out there. I guess so it's completely nonsensical for you then, Josh, to say that God perceives things outside of the physical world. Like that on your view is just nonsensical.
No, I think Josh would agree that even people perceive non-physical things.
No, but you see, God doesn't have a physical body, right? So if God is perceiving it without a physical body, then there's something wrong there on Josh's view.
Oh, I think Josh is saying that a mind requires two perspectives, the first and the third perspective.
Well, but what does it mean to perceive a non-physical thing?
What does it mean to perceive a non-physical thing? What do you think? I mean, one obvious example is, right, you have an experience of your own cognition. Do you think of cognition as a physical thing? I mean, there might be some underlying neuronal firing that causes the experiences.
I mean, so are we making a different distinction than like material and immaterial? Or are we making is physical and non-physical a different distinction? Or is it functionally the same?
Well, pre-philosophically, again, people thought of material as taking up space and non-material as not taking up space, right? But I think that's a problematic view. Or at least I think the distinction is not as interesting as people thought it was.
The distinction I always heard is that material would be essentially existing on our plane of reality that we can actually experience. Maybe that's not the correct distinction that we're making here. Maybe that's why I'm confused.
I need to think about that definition. So if we can't experience as it's not material, that's the idea.
Yeah, I don't know exactly the word.
I mean, do you think of
I've heard a lot relating to the natural supernatural distinction. If that helps you understand what I don't know if I'm right. I don't think I'm right necessarily. I'm just trying to understand what you guys are saying.
Well, I mean, I think that's a problematic view because I think of dreams as experiences, right? They're not non-experiences. You could say they're not experiences that relate to what we traditionally call material, but then it's no longer the case that you could define material as that which we experience, right? And like I said, I think thinking you can experience cognition or not, right? Like, meaning we don't experience every aspect of what would be
Right,
correlated
but are
with
you saying that dreams would be something that we would experience, but would also be non-physical?
So, again, my definition of physical and non-physical is different. Can you hold on? Sorry, I need to just mute for a second.
Yeah, it's okay. I know Danny was the one who said it. If Danny wants to clarify, I'm just.
Oh,
a
I
little
thought
confused.
I said something like how a non-physical entity can perceive something physical. Like God is non-physical, but he still perceives things in the physical world.
I thought you said that like we as physical entities can perceive non-physical things, or now maybe no.
Oh,
I'm
I
just
didn't mean to
forgetting.
say that. I don't know about that. I thought that's what I said was.
Or I might just be misremembering as well, but I thought it was
Maybe I
something
said
like
that.
that.
Was it in the last like few minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, what I meant to say is God is non-physical, but he perceives things in the physical world, right? So
Okay.
and I'm just and on Josh's view, there are certain criteria for perception, including the need for a body, right? But Christians see God as not having a body, right? So then I was asking Josh, that would be problematic to say that God perceives things even though he's wholly immaterial.
But Josh, by body, do you mean like a mind or like the source of a mind?
No, he means like brain, all the physical facts or physical
Right.
states, right?
Right.
You
But he
need
doesn't mean
that.
like literally like I need arms and legs and that kind of stuff. He means like you
No,
need
he
like
also
a
doesn't
physical
mean
source of a
extensionality.
mind.
Oh no, he's a dualist, right? He thinks that our mental properties are not going to reduce to any physical phenomena.
This is a little confusing to be honest with all these different opinions or all these different
But I, as far as his reasoning, I don't really have. I don't think he uses the rule following argument there, but I think that's one thing that might hint at an issue there where we needed something like intentionality.
Okay, so I understand how you can say like God as a non-physical being could perceive physical things, but yeah, maybe you just misspoke when you said the other thing. I guess I should just ignore that because that kind of made no sense.
Yeah, I don't know what it. I think I would have a hard time understanding how I could perceive something non-physical outside of myself. Right. That's why there's a problem with one of our underlying assumptions is that there are other minds outside our own. Right. We can't verify that. Right. So that's a kind of basic belief according to Plantinga and others. But yeah, so I think if I did say that, you were warranted in asking what that meant.
If Jesus was fully God, was he not physical?
I'm sorry, what?
I believe in Christianity that Jesus was fully God, along with God and the Holy Spirit. And Jesus was physical. So God must have some sort of physical...
Well, what we mean by fully is we just mean that he has the divine attributes.
Well, why couldn't it just as easily just be God's like essence? I'm not saying Danny holds this position, but just be like God's essence that is non-physical that took on a physical form, that like entered a physical form.
That's why I think some Christians refer it to as the condescension, right? Where God humiliated himself in some sense to become physical.
But his essence wouldn't be becoming physical, right? It would just be inhabiting like a physical form.
Yeah,
maybe that's just semantic bullshittery. I don't really know.
No,
I'm not a Christian, so I don't defend this shit on the regular.
Right, and I don't.
Hold on, Jesus' body was resurrected and went up to heaven. Surely that was physical.
Yeah, so I don't know what that would mean. I don't know if like that's to say like when Elijah and Enoch and Jesus ascended to heaven. I don't know how that works in terms of what happened to
Doesn't
their
Paul
bodies.
also say that when we are going to be, like resurrected or not? We're going to be resurrected, but then our bodies will also come with us to heaven. Isn't that Paul's view?
Yeah,
not
like
just
there's
our
a new heaven and a new earth, this kind of thing. But I don't know what that means. I mean, I was just contending. My contention was, could our minds perceive without our physical bodies. That's I think it's possible, but on Josh's view, there's I can't tell if he's saying that's impossible or we have no reason to believe that.
Ballsack.
What was the question?
Wait, who muted you, Justin? Someone muted
Oh,
you?
I don't know. I think I had my phone on and I didn't realize it.
Well,
I think you guys
someone
heard
had
me
a question.
masturbating.
Someone had a question.
Oh, I think Danny, you were asking if Josh was saying that if it's impossible for minds to not require bodies or something.
But he was saying it wasn't possible, but his reasoning, I don't think, gave that entailment, right?
Yeah, I mean, we would say we have reasons to believe it's impossible, but I don't think he's given you the argument. Well, I mean, he gave you the basic
He gave me
argument.
the problem for. He gave me why we don't have reason to believe that, right? Why it's not. That's to me translates it's not plausible, right? And I'm not asking the plausibility of it.
Wasn't Josh suggesting that if you say that something like a non-physical mind can exist, you can't make the same inference that you would with the Kalam's first premise?
Wait, what about the first premise in the Kalam in minds?
Okay, the first premise of the Kalam is everything that begins to exist has a cause. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, well, can I not also say that every mind that I come across is physical?
No, well, I mean, Josh and I are dualists. We don't think that minds are physical. But I think we come to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, rather than physical, the result of physicality.
I don't know if he believes that. I think he does, but I don't believe that.
Danny, find a less complicated God. This is too much.
Well, wouldn't you expect God to be complicated? I mean,
not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, why would we expect him to be complicated or simple? Why would we expect either necessarily?
Right. I mean, I think he was just joking. Like, find something that's easier to
I
understand.
realize.
But I mean, if God is hyperdimensional and I mean, it's like I feel like we're like two-dimensional structures trying to understand a three-dimensional one. Now imagine taking that analogy, we are three-dimensional structures that's trying to understand a hyperdimensional being.
What does a hyperdimensional being even mean? What the fuck is that?
Well, I mean, I'm not a physics guy, but aren't there multiple dimensions more than just three?
Right, but what is hyperdimensional? Does it mean all the dimensions at the same time? How does that work? Or the ultimate dimension?
Why would having access to another dimension make you a god?
No, I don't know that either. I'm just saying there was a joke list where find a god that's less complicated, right? And
I think the least complicated notion of God that I could think of, right? Sorry, I'll let you finish what you were saying.
No, go ahead.
It's probably just, a God with a being with consciousness, right? Where their consciousness is caused by, as you imagine all the materiality on Earth. Let's say. Right?
Well, I'm just saying that I wouldn't. Maybe Silent was correct. I wouldn't really expect anything in terms, like, I don't know what level of complication I would expect in terms of the nature of God, but if it turned out to be really complicated, I wouldn't be surprised.
Hope trademark said R plus L equals J.
Justin, you want to rabbit my hero? Or are you home?
What does that mean?
We just discussed it.
Rabbit? I didn't discuss anything like that.
You want
He
to
wants,
watch?
he wants to go into the website Rabbit with you, and
Oh,
only
I thought you
you.
were talking about fucking League.
Oh, I meant to, okay. Do you want to rabbit My Hero Academia?
No, not alone.
Not right now. You said.
Not alone. I'm gonna need a third party to keep us safe.
Oh, I see. Okay, Tom.
You need a fourth party to keep us safe.
From who? From Justin? Oh, Justin's not that bad.
From ourselves.
Yeah, I heard about your contemptuous looks.